Dr. Sherice J. Nelson, you are an expert in international affairs and political strategies, global political strategies. We started weeks ago before the Ukraine-Russia conflict started. Now it is in full swing. There's a lot of developments that have happened, but because you're so busy, I haven't been able to keep up with you. But let's talk about some of these latest developments. I think it's really critical that we as Black women look at it, because when I see the news differently. And I'm like, why are they not reporting about this? So on and so forth. But this goes to, like you said, who controls the information, dictates the narrative, thus controls the people. So there are several major components about Ukraine and Russia I want to talk about, but we start with your overall analysis about what's going on so people know where we are in this war?
Yeah, so the first thing that I want to say, and I always use this disclaimer anytime I talk about the subject, is that I am not a Soviet Union scholar. I'm not a Russian scholar, but I am an internationalist. And by being an internationalist and understanding the international landscape, I then understand said strategy. So where we are right now is the fact that Putin ran in there with the gat and wasn't prepared for the fight that he got. He ran in, like we say, he ran in with the gat, but was not ready for the clapback. If that makes sense.
Ran in with the click clack, wasn't ready for the clapback, guys.
Ran in there with the click clack, wasn't ready for the clapback, and I think that is what Zelensky and his band has shown. Has shown the rest of the world. That Russia wasn't going to be able just to sweep in and then take over Ukraine. I want people to also remember that in 2016, I believe, or it's been since 2014, that the Ukrainian people went against its own government for not allowing them into the EU or not allowing them access to the European markets. Because of the prime minister at the time's affinity towards Russia. And after a war through the winter, they ended up winning this, this almost like civil war. They ended up winning that, and the prime minister then defected and ran to Russia. So my thing, like I've been saying in many of my private circles, is I do not understand why Putin thought that he wasn't dealing with his own people. If the Ukrainian people were willing to go against its own government because they were not being allowed into the European commercial space, why did he think that he was just going to come in and sweep the country? I think that's naive to begin with. I also think the idea of the fact that these people are still of the Soviet Union. These are former Soviet Union. So the same level of tactics and grit and determination that Russian forces have, Ukrainian forces have as well. So where we are currently at the moment is that Russia, like I said, was not prepared for the pushback, and they have had to cede Chernobyl. And ceding Chernobyl is huge, because the ceding of Chernobyl is the understanding, or is the realization, I think, by the military folks on the ground, that they are not going to be able to take Ukraine, and that they need to settle on trying to further annex pieces of Ukraine on the eastern side of the country. So that's number one. Chernobyl, for those that are listening, is a nuclear site that had a nuclear accident in 1986, and is a nuclear stronghold, or a place where there's nuclear weapons. Since the invasion, the Russians have had that has had Chernobyl and the facility there running under their control. They have ceded that, given that back to the Ukrainians. However, they have taken modern news reports, and let me say to you, Kaya, I look at an array of English, what I mean by news that publishes in English, and then there is a guy on the ground, a reporter on the ground in Twitter that I watch very closely. But Al Jazeera, BBC, us and Australia are all reporting, all of our major news outlets are reporting that close to 100 National Guardsmen from the Ukrainians have been taken from the Chernobyl area and taken as prisoners of war although they have turned the site back over in Chernobyl. And so what we're seeing is a retreat, although many would not like to call it that, but we're seeing a retreat back into the eastern side of the Ukraine, where most of the folks are Russian speakers. What we're also seeing, though, is that in those areas that they're retreating to, in the Donbass area, remember the Donbass is in the east, and then Crimea, which is in the south, that I think we've talked about previously. What we're also seeing, though, is that the fact that they are losing manpower. So they are now forcibly making all men suit up in military armor. The Russians are, because they are losing men left and right, and the morale is down amongst the military ranks. So we're seeing a retreat back into an area, the idea of re-strategizing and trying to take the city. Well, they've decimated really the city of Mariupol, but Mariupol all the way up to the northeastern border of Russia. So that's where we are strategically as far as who has what pieces. However, as a counterpiece of this is that Ukrainian forces are still in that region and have been in that region since 2014 when Crimea was annexed. So they have unidentified themselves, and most of the Ukrainian soldiers that are in that area speak Russian. So they've been able to infiltrate a lot of these brigades that are in Eastern Russia, and many are saying that they are falling apart because of the fact that there are Ukrainian soldiers that are left that are key inside of these different brigades that are communicating across to each other to make them even less successful in the region.
Well, I want to say, I'm going to start with what you were talking about. There are also starting to be not necessarily reports of defectors, but there's a rise and a surge of Russians who have been very critical against the Russian government. So you have waves of protests. You have disruptions in military, within the military. You have internal issues within the Russian military. People are not agreeing with what Putin is doing. You also have reports of demonstrators or people who are protesting, are talking about these very extreme and violent measures that are being taken out against them when they're voicing what's happening.
Well, that's why Putin has shut down Twitter and Facebook inside of the country. Right? He has shut down Twitter and Facebook inside of the country. He has also, all of the Russian protesters, for the most part, they have quieted down. And there's I grabbed this stat because I wanted to give it to you, that a polling company, Levada, said that 83% of people are now saying that they approve of the war and what Putin is doing, which is up 69% from January. Now, as a person who runs a research center, the Jewel Lamar Prestige Research Polling Public Policy and Research Center, what we know is that level of swing doesn't happen that
fast. Yeah.
It doesn't happen that quickly, not from 69% to 83%. So what does that mean? That means that, and it doesn't mean that the pollsters are not capturing what's being said. What it really means is that people have now become fearful of really speaking about how they really feel about the war, or they've become apathetic. And so that large of a swing, those are the things that folks that study quantitative data or opinions or how people feel about things, we know very quickly if there's a large swing. That's a huge swing. A huge swing. If we see that, then we know that one or two things are happening. People are not being honest about how they feel, or they're apathetic. They're apathetic to the entire process. And so you're exactly right. We're seeing high levels of violence inside of the ranks. We are seeing, and then we're seeing lots of violence then put on those that are willing to speak out against, that are not inside the military. So this high level of violence has in many ways allowed us to turn, or I wouldn't say allow us as the world, but has allowed many inside of Russia to turn a deaf ear to what's really going on in this war.
Right. Those are very good points. And as well, when we're talking about Chernobyl, this also came out that soldiers are now beginning to test for high levels of radiation, which was something we spoke about earlier in terms of the environmental repercussions that are going to happen if you have some type of armed struggle in an area that still has high radiation levels from the nuclear disaster that happened in 1986.
Yeah, and that's my biggest argument as to why I think Putin strategically, or I shouldn't say Putin, but though, because, and the reason I'm saying I shouldn't say Putin is because there has now been several reports from Western sources and Chinese sources that that Putin is not getting accurate information about what's going on in the ground. And so that's why I'm saying that I shouldn't say Putin, but I believe that the generals, or those that are actually controlling the movements of war, have been strategic about allowing the Ukrainians to have Chernobyl back, so that then they can blame the Ukrainians for then this radiation exposure. Right? Because if you're controlling it, then you then have to take on the responsibility of it. If you then allow that control to be ceded, then you can also control the information space. Because everybody has to remember here, if I do not have the ability to then by force wipe you out, then I have to continuously fight on the ground while controlling the information space. So it's not an and or, it's an and but.
Right. Yeah. So I want to also talk about,
and I just thought about that, not an and, but it's not an and or, it's a both and. You have to both fight on the ground and control the information space. And I think the polling that we're seeing, the fact that Twitter, Facebook, Instagram have been shut down in Russia, the fact that politicians that are in disagreement in the Kremlin are in hiding, lets us know that that many of the things that are being reported from the outside are actually true.
Right. And I think as a social scientist, right, or a pollster, you would actually throw that poll out, because it's so ridiculously it skews so in one area, and we know, like that fast and considering all the conditions.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Arc Republic. If you like what you see and you like what you hear, you can actually keep this mothership going. How? You can make a tax-deductible donation in several ways. One, Cash App us at Arc Republic Media. And you can also go on our website, arcrepublic.com/donate. As well, you can also donate to our fiscal sponsor and our sister organization at Black Farmers Index, that is Cash App, or also go onto their website, blackfarmersindex.com. We are two Black women-owned media organizations who share our profits so folk can thrive.
This is such a complicated, and we could just do a whole show on Ukraine and Russia, which I think we need to do in the future. I want to hit some points, but you stated and I know we're on time constraint. I know we're not going to probably hit all the things we said, but you talked about the 2016, how in 2016 in Ukraine, how basically there was a change of the guards, there was a change of administration. A couple of weeks ago, I read a really good opinion piece by Chris Hedges, who's who was the former New York Times journalist and covered part of the region. His assessment, as well as there is gives a really different perspective called Mint News Press, said that one, that was actually U.S. sponsored, that transition. And so his position is that the U.S. actually played a hand in unseating a democratically elected president of Ukraine, which then kicks up a lot of the issues with Russia and if Ukraine could join NATO, right? But we talked about this off air weeks ago in terms of the criticisms, in terms of the hand that U.S. has played in manipulating the political and the political structure and NATO over the years. So it's not saying that the United States is this great white hero, or great white cousin of Ukraine coming in and swooping in. But it has problematic tentacles and practices leading up to this war. I wanted to say that. Are you familiar with that criticism?
So if any of your listeners really want to read a good book, I think a good book is called Not One Inch. It's written by Emmy Sattery. She's out of Yale. She was able to get, and the reason I think it's such a great book is because she was able to get her hands on so many primary documents that help us to understand what happened or what happened historically from when the Iron Curtain falls, to the Clinton administration in the region. And what I will say is this, and this is one thing that I think where the United States spites its nose but sets its face, is that we posture ourselves as being the most equitable, the most fair, the et cetera,
the most democratic. Right.
But we, like everybody else, are fighting for our own interest. We are not like any other country that is not trying to forward our own interest. The reason that we continuously put our foot in our mouths is that our rhetoric doesn't often line up within the interest that we promote. And so this idea about the democratically elected person, there is let me say it this way, there's nuanced understandings of this. And the reason I would say that the United States in many ways selected or not selected, but championed or supported said leader was the idea that that particular leader was okay with not joining NATO, but then joining the EU. Right. That was the trade-off. The trade-off was, listen, if we then allow you to join NATO, then we are going to get into a direct conflict with Russia, which we do not want to do. However, what we will do is we'll allow you into the European Union, or we'll support, I shouldn't say allow because we're not inside the European Union ourselves, but we will support, right? And we will grease the wheels where we have influence, in particular in Germany, in France, and in the UK. We will lean on our relationships with those countries to include you guys inside of the European Union, which should in many ways quell some of this need for NATO protection, right? So if we think about it that way, and I'm not trying to absolve the United States in any way from its responsibilities, I'm saying that it's a little more nuanced in the fact of we'll support a leader that's then going to be okay with accepting interest into the EU versus pushing for the need to then join NATO, because it's going to get us into a direct shootout with Russia. Let me also say, though, that the United States has done in many ways the same thing when it comes to Russia. For instance, when the Iron Curtain falls and Russia is having extreme financial troubles, right? The United States says, look, if you don't get hoppy, right? If you're not trying to rush into Eastern Europe and to perform violence, we'll talk to the International Monetary Fund about then floating you guys some money to help out your economy. Right. So the United States is not, and I want to be very clear about this. The United States plays both sides. They are not in any way they play both sides in the argument or in the posture of we're trying to keep peace. Right. We're trying to keep peace. So we need to make sure that each side has the tools that it needs to, quote unquote, keep peace. And that I would say that reach for us to help Russia with the IMF then pushes, I think, Klobuchar to then put Putin in the position to rise to the position he's in today, because yes, he needed the financial economic bailout, but he needed nationalism to still stay high. So I choose Putin as my successor or the leader while I'm on the back end taking money from the quote unquote West that I don't like, right? So it's far more nuanced, I think, than people give it credit for. And I'm not saying that the United States' hand is not in it. I'm saying that their hand is far more playing both sides than what's often reported.
Right. No, that's a really good assessment. It also, for me, gives more clarity as thinking through Donbass and Crimea region. In the news, this is where like the news does the narrative. The news is that Russia came and kind of like bulldozed its way and said, give me that, give me that. But what we know now is that in those regions, and so they say, okay, well, in those regions, you have people who are close to Russia. These are, logistically, location-wide, culturally. So
many of them have Russian passports.
Right. Yeah, okay. And right. And this is why, but also in addition to them being, let's say, Putin sympathizers, and not wanting to disrupt or break their ties with Russia, they also have been very critical of the Zelensky administration too. See, that's the other side that not talking about, and critical of the Zelensky administration in terms of how Zelensky comes into power, right? With this thing you were talking about, the United States plays both hands. So I think that's like really important in terms of, for me, in terms of understanding and thinking through.
So this is something else, and this is why, although again, I'm not trying to defend Obama, but what I am saying is this is why Obama makes the decision not to then allow the United States to get involved with the annexation of Crimea. Because of what we're just describing. If I have a set of people that are hot or not necessarily all in about staying with the Ukraine, then why would I then commit U.S. troops or U.S. whatever to a region that is being disputed? But let me also say this idea that these annexed areas are want to become a part of Russia is also a misnomer. They just annexed. That doesn't mean that they want to be a part of Russia. They just want to be their own area, and they want the ability to choose to then decide if they're going to align with Russia or then align with the rest of Eastern Europe. They want the choice. And so that's something else that I think is being, that's a nuance that's not being played out. These folks, they understand that they're in a geopolitical juggernaut, if that makes sense.
Correct.
And so they have leanings, but they want to then be able to be like Kosovo, for that matter, and be able to be an annexed area that's surrounded by other interests, right? In the case of Kosovo, the Serbs that are surrounding Kosovo, but they want to be able to stand alone and make their own decision about who they then get in alliances with. And one of their biggest problems with Zelensky is the fact that administration has spent lots of money developing the Kiev region, and that money and resources haven't reached the eastern side of the Ukraine. So their biggest, I guess the biggest thing is economics is at the center of all of it. And because the United States has the most diverse economy in the world, they are by proxy always in the middle of it, because the economic system is no longer backed to gold or any finite resource. It's actually backed into confidence. And the confidence, although there's 60, economic systems throughout the world that trade every day, the United States system is the most diverse. So this idea that the United States doesn't have a role to play is ludicrous. They do have a role to play because everything's back into economics. And if we as the United States has the most diverse economy in the world, then we have something to lose at all times.
Right. I mean, you're talking about this fiat money, and also the fiat money connected to the petrodollar, that's connected to Saudi Arabia, and how the United States kind of finagles its way of using of oil also in the fiat money that we're talking about. So in this conversation of currency, Putin has been attempting to have nations purchase oil in rubles. And also between between Russia and China, there's this kind of like, it's not silent, but this shift and pivot to try to use gold now to back their currency. This is getting interesting.
Well, of course it is. So this is why Donald Trump was such a friend of Russia, and why the Russians had a vested interest in getting Trump in the office. If everybody remembers, inside of our Constitution, there's something called the Emoluments Clause, which basically says that you need to divest from other investments in other countries, because then we don't know if your loyalty is to our sovereign land. And because Trump had run up all of his credit in the US, he went over to Russia and then used Russian oligarchs to back many of his deals. So my argument from the very beginning about why Trump was so buddy-buddy with Putin was, if I lower the value of the US dollar, then my exchange for how much I owe Putin, or how much I owe Russian oligarchs in rubles, evens out. So my argument is this. Let's say for every, and this is just all fictitious, but let's say for every $1, there's 50 rubles. If I'm able to get that gap to shorten, and that for every $1 is 20 rubles, then I owe the Russian oligarchs far less money back. So that's what the overall large game is. And what Russia, China, as you talked about, are the most upset about is this. Remember I said the United States has the most diverse economy in the world. This is what it's like for your listeners. It's like playing craps or playing, Russian roulette. And you have enough money to put money on every single number. So there's no way you ever lose. It's just about how much you're going to lose, right? It's not about, and that is what Russia is essentially upset about, is the idea that the United States has their thumb on the scale because they have enough money to spread around on every number. So it doesn't matter what number hits, they're still going to get paid. Now, the argument the United States makes is, yeah, we're going to get paid, but we are also losing on all the numbers that didn't get hit. Right. And Russia's argument back to that is, yeah, but we don't have enough money to spread around on all of the numbers, right? So that's the proverbial economic argument that's happening here. China is saying, yeah, Russia, but you should have, if the United States wants to continue to maintain its power by then taking and putting all of their chips on all of the numbers, then they're going to eventually go into debt, buy their debt. So then you have more stake on the numbers that are out there that are being played. That's China's position, which is why China is slowly backing away from this Russian position, because their thing is, you're not going to bankrupt us on the wheel, because although we can't put our money on every single number, right? Right. We own the debt that allows them to put money on every single number. But what does that have to do with currently them positioning and using gold to back their currency? That's the transition, right? Okay. So while on one side I am holding on to the debt that allows me to put that allow the United States is allowed to put money on every single number, and we as China, that puts them in debt, and we own some of that debt. Well, while we're owning some of that debt, we are also taking our currency and then backing it into gold, so that then once their debt balloons too big that is no longer tenable, we are now controlling the economic space, because our currency is not going to be backed on the confidence that everybody else has backed their currency on. Our money is going to then be backed on this finite resource. So they're doing both at the same time. Okay. All right. So I hope that makes sense. No, that makes sense. Yeah, no, it does. I'm not going to limit myself. I'm going to play in both games. I'm not going to limit myself, and that's why China is, yeah, Russia, we'll throw you some pennies. Yeah, we'll quietly, but I can't allow this game that the United States is playing, or the rest of the Western world is playing, by putting all of their money on all of these numbers, completely collapse before my currency is strong enough to stand on its own. And my currency is not strong enough to stand on its own, because we as the United States are still the largest gold holders throughout the entire world. So although they're taking their currency and backing it to gold, right, they have to be able to have enough of it back to gold before they allow the other system to totally collapse.
Okay, so yeah, no, this is a lot of clarity. Just for time, I know I want to talk more about it.
I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I mean, what you're saying is that in times of war, even before war, nations have got to position themselves in multiple ways in order for their currency to remain as strong as it possibly can in this global economy.
And what I'm saying to you is Russia has overplayed its hand so much that China does not want to get economically tied to them because it's going to overextend China as well. And China is never about overextending itself. And that is where I think Putin has also miscalculated.
Right. And also, if you consider the fact that also we're still dealing with COVID. And so this week, China shut down Shanghai. And so you have these stop and goes, these disruptions in China's economy. They're like, we can't afford to be doing this, right? Like we're trying to maintain our global power. We're trying to keep our yuan, our yuan,
Not only that, I'm trying to maintain my global power with one of the largest physical people populations in the world. I have a billion people that I'm responsible for. The United States has 330 million. Russia, although landmass it expands, they don't have a billion people that they're responsible for. So my economic system has to then encompass the fact that I have a billion people. So that's something else that people are not taking into consideration. The only other nation that's as far as size, meaning population wise, that has to take that into consideration is India, which you've talked about. Right. Which is why India is being very careful about the fact that they're playing neutral in this entire scenario, because they understand that in their own strategic interest, taking either side is going to hurt them.
Right. Yeah. No, I was. So I'm glad you mentioned that because, India is playing very neutral. They said that, we're friends to Russia. This like a week, they said that, they were friends to Russia. But, y'all need to work this on out. You know what I'm saying?
The reason India has said that is they're in the member of BRIC nations, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, right? They're in this BRIC nation group. And what they're saying is out of these quote unquote emerging areas or emerging markets, we cannot get ourselves saddled with trying to take a side with Russia over China. Although China's our arch enemy and we don't too much care for them, we are sandwiched in between them regionally and financially. And we need to always be able to call on the United States to bail us out economically. And that means, because we're regionally squished, we can't take an active role in siding with other. If we have to choose, right, we will choose Russia. Right. If we have to choose.
Really? You think they would? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Because they can, India and China are, put it like this, India and China almost like oil and water. Right. So if they have to take a side out of these BRIC nations, it's going to be Russia, but they're not going to take Russia's side to then spite the United States either. If that
right. And then also part of their neutrality is that India has a lot of investments in Ukraine, particularly in its education of doctors. 24% of Ukraine's immigration population is that of students from India that go to Ukraine to study medicine.
And that's Africans. Let me also be clear. That's why
the Africans are there, and the Caribbean people and the Brazilians. Yeah,
that's what they were there for. And let's also remember that there are rumblings that, once this is all settled, that India is going to be the country tapped to come and rebuild Ukraine.
Yeah. So this is why India says, I can't spend my money. I got my money stashed on the side. I wish we had that sister that you shared, who could break it down. Basically, what's going on is China is saying, turn them lights off and keep them doors closed. We got a whole bunch of mouths to feed here, and India saying, I'm going to stash my money for a rainy day because that rainy day I know is coming. Anytime. So in order to protect my babies, my people, I've got to be in a position in order to help Ukraine, because Ukraine is a very integral part in making sure that we have a medical community, right? And even Africa, right, that we're talking about. I want to talk about
let me quickly say, and the reason that Africans have had to leave the continent and go to the Ukraine is because of the vacuum created in Libya without having Muammar Gaddafi. Because Muammar Gaddafi was the place. Libya was often the place that Africans were sent to then study medicine. I just want to put that out there.
Woo, bomb dropper right there. Wow. So let's talk about I wanted to talk about race relations in Africa. As a Black person, as a person of African descent, it disturbs me a lot to know I don't even know if gross disparities disparity is the word or term to use, how African students and their families have been treated in this process, and also the invisibility about this serious issue that still is going on. And it's not only just in Ukraine, it's not only in Poland, but it's right now, it's just in Europe in general, because there are Africans that are still stuck in Ukraine. Our Republic reported on that. There are Africans still stuck in Ukraine and in Russian occupied territories. The Ukrainians are disallowing Africans from getting aid from Russians.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's one of the issues that's coming out. Another thing, Africans who have fled and are able to leave, but they're fleeing to neighboring countries, Hungary, Germany, France, are being discriminated against.
Well, that's it. And out of the pick of the poison, France is probably the worst place to go. Germany is probably the better out of the. Poland, you could forget it. I mean, in Poland, it's going to be all out, because Poland is taking on the most amount of refugees, and in our pygmalical world system, Black is bad and it's sticky at the bottom, and so. The Black humanity is not going to be seen as equitable and fair, and so they're not going to get their fair shake.
As a matter of fact, Sherice, Poland tells the African immigrants they have 15 days to make their transition out of Poland, where what do you want to call it, indigenous white Ukrainian is being welcomed with open arms and saying that you could stay indefinitely until you get it together. Now also reports are coming out. There's 3 women who have been advocating. I don't have their names in front of me. Hopefully I could pull it. But there are 3 women, 2 from the UK. One is actually a medical student who was in Ukraine, who began to report about what it was like trying to get out, have been advocating, also said that now these students, and mind you, these are medical students. If you are a medical student, you're 25, 26, 27, 20, 30 years old. A lot of these people have families, they're married. It's not this 18-year-old young in the world, but that was a side note. They're getting arrested now. They're getting detained in these countries. And also what to your point about the African folk that are coming in, and also another panelist, we have a panelist named Africa, talks about how a lot of these African students are from affluent families in Africa. And, so they're coming from privilege. Nigeria, it has the largest, immigrant population of African students. So they're coming from privilege, and they've been reduced to this type of treatment. Their money is getting stolen. They had to leave in the middle of the night. They're being taxed, this Black tax that they never experienced really, in Africa.
I say it this way, but I hope that encourages folks on the continent to create their own schools so we don't have to send our kids to white ones. And I'm gonna just leave that where that is. But to speak to the racism piece of it, the idea is that Europe is what my grandmother would say, is reaping what they sow. And they colonized Africa, they split Africa up, and in many ways stole resources, the raw resources and materials, and used them to enrich Western life, especially directly in Europe, in a way. The United States in many ways stole human labor, right? They stole us, not necessarily stealing materials the same way that Europe stole the material land, as far as the materials that are coming from the land, whereas as the United States really to people. And so now that's coming home to roost because those people are saying, well, since you took our resources and now you are, and we still have a lot of the raw resources, but you're industrializing them and manufacturing them here, which allows you to live a certain lifestyle that is limited to me, not unavailable, but limited to me. I'm coming to you and I'm going to force you to educate me. Well, that is then causing a high level of bitterness all across Europe. And I felt it and experienced it in 2018 when I was there, when I was in the Netherlands, which was, I would say, far more hospitable than Germany was and then France was. Those are the three places that I was. Out of the three of them, the Netherlands was the most hospitable. Germany was probably the middle of the road, but France was outright rife. As soon as I showed up in France, I had to quickly show. Wait. I had to show them like this. Wait. I got my.
Got to show that blue passport. Got to show that passport. Yeah.
Wait. U.S. U.S. No. U.S. Right.
Oh, and don't go there and not know French. Oh boy.
Yeah, that's a whole nother. I mean, and I had to tell one of them, you wouldn't even have a country if it wasn't for Black American soldiers who saved this MF. So please leave me alone, okay? And one.
Oh, sounds like the conversations I had in Italy. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, one spit on me, and I had to take a real good calculation real quick and realize, although I may be one of the richest Black people in the world, I'm not rich enough for the U.S. to care about me to come get me. So I had to quickly recalibrate when I got spit on. While I was in France. And so what I'm saying is that if as a tourist in France, right, I had that experience, I could just imagine what African refugees are being treated like on the continent of Europe at this time. But we have to remember that Europe is reaping what it's sown.
That's a good point. Mm-hmm.
You Europeans, right? And this to me directly when it comes to which is why I dropped the bomb about Gaddafi, you were so dissatisfied with things that he did, and I'm not saying that he wasn't problematic, he was, that you in many ways have created this phenomenon that you now have to deal with. Because these students are there because they can't go to Libya, where they were also being treated differently because of their skin tonation. Let's be very clear, right? Mm-hmm. Nigerians were being treated badly in Libya as well. I mean, in the capital, Tripoli there as well, right? So
and there's still an active slave trade in Libya.
Correct. Right? So let's not romanticize it, but let's also say Europe, stop crying defection, stop crying woe is me, when you've had an active hand in this. And to those African students, it is sad to me that it's taken this for them to understand that racism is global. I think for a lot of them, they've been so insulated in their countries that this is so shocking and appalling. If you watch a lot of these reports from these middle-aged, from these middle income and high income families that are from the continent, it's just disbelief because they don't have to experience racism in their country to this extent. And I think this is making them far more amenable to struggles of Blacks in the diaspora across the globe, because they are now having to experience this things that you and I, Kaya, think about consistently. Right. They haven't really in their lifetimes haven't had to think about it. I mean, it's sad, but I think it's giving them a lens that they haven't had as well.
Well, I mean, if we want to keep it all the way real and a buck in terms of, keep it 100, part of the tensions between African and Black American / African American discourse is that Black people, Black folk in America have for generations been deemed, D-I-N-G-E-D, and deemed as these victims, as these complainers, as people who, want a handout. And really, it is their condition is a result of themselves and not properly enterprising. And so, and using racism as this crutch in order to justify exactly where they are politically, culturally, and economically, not only in the United States, but the world. And so what they're experiencing is the exact same thing we've been saying for a very long time.
For a very long time. So while you've been calling us mutts, and while you've been calling us mutts, while you've been calling us lazy, while you've been falling inside of the tropes, right?
While you've been calling us Akata and the Johnsons. Oh, I know them, right?
Right.
And the cotton pickers and stuff like that.
Right. While you've been doing all of that, now you are getting to understand that racism is a global phenomenon, and that your Nigerian heritage is a smut stamp, the same way that it's a smut stamp on me here in these Americas.
And so that is a lesson. That's a hard lesson, but you know, as grandmother said, you know, you reap what you sow. But this is the great reckoning, and this is the positioning, I think, that even you were talking about some time ago in terms of how the world is shifting, how nation states are shifting. In the globalization era, you had more fluidity, more porous kind of understandings of belonging and citizenship. It's not like that anymore, right? So it's going to be very interesting what this conversation about Nigeria will have, in particular with Russia, who is the number one supplier of fertilizer. And now Nigeria is trying to position itself as filling in the global fertilizer shortage that is going on. How do we play that in politics? Because what we know historically is that when African countries attempt to enter into this game of global trade, they're, you know, I'm saying pimp slap back. So this is going to be interesting.
This is going to be interesting, but this is the thing that I think is going to protect them in this case, is that, again, Barack Obama's administration laid a framework for allowing ECOWAS, which is a trade bloc, it's a regional trade bloc. So that's usually how Africans get in the game. They have to regionally trade and then send it to a Western power, and then the Western power gets to trade off of the regional trade, if that makes sense.
Right.
Well, ECOWAS getting a larger standing and say so in the Western atmosphere has played a huge role in allowing for Westernized countries to stop being the middleman, if that makes sense, and that there's this direct kind of connection that's happening. And so pimp slapped, I don't disagree that they're gonna get slapped, but I don't know if it's going to be pimp, if that makes sense.
No, I was saying historically that has happened. I don't know what's going to happen now because people are struggling. You know, for example, the U.S. is now Venezuela's bestest friend trying to get that oil. Okay, but
well, we need, and Biden talked about this. We just got to be, we're Venezuela's best friend trying to get this oil. But my thing is just open up the damn oil reserves and stop playing. I mean, I don't want to get into that. I get the piece of it, but my thing is that, well, let me also say this, because I definitely want to put this out there. Trump opened them up to ease the rise of petrol, period. And so now it's put the Biden administration in an awkward position because we are getting close to a level in our reserves that we're not comfortable with. But that's also because, which is not being discussed, is the fact that Trump opened them to keep oil prices artificially low to begin with. And had we dealt with the fact that prices were rising before this Biden administration, and they were rising due to the global pandemic, right? That was happening as Biden was coming in.
Correct.
They were already rising. And what Trump did in many ways to satisfy this is then to open up our reserves and allow more reserve oil to be used. That puts this Biden administration, and it wouldn't have mattered, let's say Trump wasn't running again, it wouldn't have mattered if it was another Republican administration. Whatever administration was coming behind Trump was going to have to make a decision about, do we continue to let this oil flow or not? And this let's get good with Venezuela is all because OPEC is like, finally we can stick it to them. Finally we can get the U.S. to do what we want to do when it comes to Yemen, right? And so the United States is like, no, I'm not gonna. I will capitulate with Venezuela before I capitulate on Saudi Arabia, your involvement in Yemen.
Right. We're going to have to continue this conversation about Ukraine and
Yes.
Russia in another conversation. I want to, and you always will have the final word in all of our conversations. I need to earmark and put this stop point and emphasis on the fact that during a war where you have women and children disappearing, this rise of sex trafficking, you have people's homes being obliterated, people stuck in living in caves or in underground areas, not seeing daylight for 2 and 3 weeks at this point. You have a contingency of people that can still exhibit racism in this time where humanity is tested. That behooves me. But it just shows you how indoctrinated and how entrenched this white supremacy has gotten to be. Even in Ukrainians military, you have neo-Nazis, right? Which is an issue we haven't even gotten into. But I wanted to earmark that.
So this is what I'll say as the final point. What I think that we have to understand, and I write about this in my book on the Congressional Black Caucus, is that we're dealing with epistemological ignorance. What that epistemological just means how we come to know what we know. Mm-hmm. And how white folks have come to know themselves is in superiority. Mm-hmm. There is not a place on this globe where white folks have not been taught through literature, through experience, through treatment, through socialization, that they are not superior. So it should never shock us that they are willing to take that superiority as a cape of protection wherever they go.
Right. It should never shock us. But remember, the idea is that to be Black in Europe, you were much better in navigating it. It was much better to be Black in Europe. Right. That was, that's the thing. And also, and, the United States in particular, because when we talk about America, there's a whole bunch of countries in America. United States in particular was the boogeyman of racism. And, and when I remember when Cuba opened up that little bit of time that it did, there was this article in Grio or the Root or something, and it said, don't bring that American racism to Cuba and Latin America. We are not racist. You keep that US-based racism. Oh, but what people are seeing is that the US is just a cousin in a Game of Thrones family.
Let me say this
of white supremacy.
And this is why this has always been foolish to me. How is the United States the home of racism when the only way that Black folks got here is by European nations?
Preach on that. And we haven't even gotten to the colonial aspect of why Europe is big mad.
Forget the colonial aspect.
Right.
Forget that. Let's just deal with the colonialism. They love to argue that back and forth. Your ship brought us here, but we as meaning the United States are the owners of racism.
Right. The constructors of racism, right? Yeah, during British colonial authority, it was codified. Race was codified, okay, in order to protect their money. That's what I wanted to talk about. We're going to talk about this next time. We're going to talk about these reparations movements that are going on, because Jamaica is putting all of their testes on the table and like, I don't want the Queen to represent. We are a republic. Give me my money, right? So anyway, that was just a side note.
Wait, but I gotta say this real quick. Yeah, Jamaica's saying that now after they watched Rihanna go to Barbados and do it. Now they're willing to, because they feel like there's some political cover. And again, this is why I'm saying that the role of Black Americans. Yes, she's Barbadian and she was born there and said loyalties there and everything else. But she came over here, made this money,
yes, ma'am,
made this money and took it back home. So the economic engine that is the United States plays a huge role in how Black people move throughout the world.
Right. And not to mention, there's been reparation movements, rolling through the United States for decades, right? And people might disagree with some of the movements. Nonetheless, the demand is very real and it's very credible. If you have slave owners who made goo gobs of money in insurance claims and were paid, by England and the UK, and slave owners who had to give up their plantations were paid, then the debt is owed. That's a whole nother thing. Okay.
Yeah, but that's why the DOJ grew. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, grew to figure out what they were going to do about these insurance claims on slaves after the Civil War was lost by the South.
Okay, we're going to have that is, I got to write that down. We have a whole conversation to talk about that.
Let's embark on the Ark Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times so all can build. Let's shine, yeah.